Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're seeing it on. They will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. I hope you're having a lovely day. This is our Defense Against the Dark Arts Week. And today we're going to be continuing that subject. But first, just a few things. I want to take a moment to recommend to you the Pagan World TV auction, which you can find in a variety of places, including at eBay under Pagan World TV and at our Pagan World site. I want to recommend to you our many projects at CorellianPublishing.com, including the new books, The Book of the Dead and Travel Magic, and more things coming soon. Hello to Lynn in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lynn. I'm wearing my lovely blue tie today, which has a little bit more green in it than I had realized. In my little pentagram tie tack. And this tie was a gift to me many years ago from Becca and her life mate, who unfortunately have both since crossed into spirit. But every time I wear this tie, I think of them. And they were lovely people. It's very interesting looking back on how many people have moved into spirit in the years that that we've been doing this work. People who, in some cases, I knew very well. People I did not know as well, but certainly was acquainted with. I mean, I remember Crone Raven, one of our early mentors, who was a wonderful person. Mary Reffett from the Dancers of Shakti Temple, one of the longest surviving Corellians who has passed into spirit now. My dear altar sister, Lady Bitterwind. Hello to Davika in the chat room. It's good to see you, Davika. Many wonderful people. And I'm sure they're all very happy with the ancestors in the land of the spirits. Hello to Rajput in the chat room. Today, we were going to talk about chords. Hello to Renee in the chat room. I've titled the episode Breaking Chords, which is the ultimate point that we're going to come to in discussing defense against the dark arts. But what do we mean by chords? That's obviously where we first need to start. So when we have energetic attachments to other people and things, there are many ways that we can perceive these. One of the common ways is through chords, which are normally perceived as chords of energy, chords of light. Chord magic is also an important technique of magic, which can be addressed in this same way. But any kind of energetic attachment can be perceived as a cord connecting yourself to the source of that energy or to the reception of that energy. Hello to Sir Edward in the chat room. It's good to see you. And what happens, of course, is that energy comes through that cord and enters and or leaves you. We were talking about psychic vampires, I believe, during our conversation yesterday. Often their connection is perceived as a cord which sucks energy out of you. Some people have described that particular connection as being like a straw stuck into your aura and sucking out all the good energy. When we talk about baneful magic, one way to address the idea that you are on the receiving end of baneful magic is to look for and break the cords that connect you to what people may have done. But it's also important to bear in mind that you're going to have energetic cords to many other things. And there are a couple of ways that you can go about this. You can narrow your search to specific effects if you know what they are, and look only for the cord or cords that connect you to the cause of that effect. Or you can go through and break every cord you find. And why would this be a good thing if they're not all negative connections? And the answer is the positive patterns will reassert themselves. So I want to recommend, as part of psychic hygiene, going through and clearing the cords that connect you to other people, places, events, etc., on a regular basis. And the positive patterns will reassert themselves because your higher self will allow that, but you want to make sure the negative ones do not. And Sir Edward says cord breaking is needed. Yes, it absolutely is, and most people never think of it. One of the things that was brought to my attention earlier this year is just how many cords and connections were attached to me that really needed breaking. And they were not things that I would necessarily have considered negative, which is why they were still there, because this is something that I do, but they were taking a lot of energy. So by regularly cutting all the cords that you find, you're freeing your own energy, you're protecting the integrity of your own energy, and you're cutting cords to any baneful magic that may have been done in your direction. And again, anything positive will reassert itself. Now, Sir Edward asks, can we cut positive cords? Yes, you absolutely can. But like I say, they are likely to reassert themselves. Whereas with the negative ones, you want to charge them not to be able to reassert themselves. And hello to Jan in the chat room. And we have a question from Rajput that we'll come back to in a couple of minutes. I'm noting it so that I remember it. My attitude is that the positive cords, well, it's like when you do a space cleansing, and in a manner of speaking, this is another part of cleansing your own space. When you cleanse that area, you want to charge it so that nothing negative can return. But the positive can. You leave that door open. That also means you need to be very clear on what you mean by positive. When you cut cords, you want to make clear that you are not allowing the negative ones to reattach, and you may want to give them special attention. The positive ones, you can allow to reattach if you're clear on what you mean by positive. This is why I mentioned what was brought to my attention earlier this year, that I had many cords that were sucking energy that I would not have considered negative until I considered the total effect of the amount of energy they were taking. And I cut many of those. Doesn't mean none of them could return, depending on whether they were truly positive. It did mean that many people who were taking parts of my energy need to find new energy. And when you do psychic work, you create these cords naturally. Leaving aside cords created through magic, just interacting with people creates cords that can be positive or negative. When you initiate someone, or someone is initiated in your lineage, there is also a cord connected, which could be the subject of its own show. We don't even want to think about how many of those cords I have. But can we cut the positive ones? Not only can we, but yes, we should, on the premise that the truly positive ones will be allowed to reform as we set it. Now, how we charge that is very important. Monica, hello, Monica. Monica says, cutting the cords also stops your energy going to them. Absolutely. It's a two-way street. And that's a rabbit hole I can go down. So we're talking ultimately about defense against the dark arts. So the cords we're talking about here, most particularly, are those that are connected to you by people who have tried to harm you magically or psychically. You very much want to cut those cords. They may be taking energy from you. They may be putting bad energy into you. Either way, you want to cut them. You want to, quote, cauterize them so they cannot reattach themselves. You want to make sure they cannot return. But you also might want to remember that while they're there, they are a two-way street. Um, and anything you're receiving through them, you can also send back through them. Um, and that's one of the reasons that it's not necessarily wise to do that. Um, I'm not a great believer. In fact, I strongly advise against the use of baneful magic. Um, one reason is that anyone who knows what they're doing can reply to it. Hello to Calvin. It's good to see you, Calvin. Now, Monica says, I instruct my spirit team to deal with any negativity sent my way. They keep me protected and send anything I don't want back to the sender. This is a very good thing to do. I do that too. Here is how it can still get to you. I've talked about this, I think, in a previous program, or maybe it was a recent class, but I compared it to Smaug the dragon from The Hobbit. Smaug the dragon was impregnable. Nothing could bring him down because his scales were absolute protection. But when he went to rain destruction on, I think it was called Lake Village, one archer happened to notice that he was missing a single scale and hit him with an arrow in that one spot and brought him down. Same story of Achilles, who was completely impregnable except for his heel, where his mother, the goddess Thetis, had held him when she dipped him into the river Styx to make him impregnable. Someone, by sheer luck, happened to hit him there. When we do protection or have our spirit guides do protection, the one thing that we often forget is what we're intentionally letting in because we've not considered it. I have a story on that. There was once a woman, I've often talked about my colorful romantic past, but usually not this story, but there was a woman who was very much in love with me. And I was in love with her too, but we were not compatible. And I had moved on knowing this. I'm completely convinced right up until this day that she then did love magic to pull me back. Ordinarily, I would have been strongly enough protected that that could not have affected me, except I actually did have love for her. I just knew better. But because those scales were missing from my armor, the magic worked. Another example, let us say that you're afraid of someone. The protections that you have might be perfectly strong, except that your fear of them could be the equivalent of a missing scale that allows them to sneak in and do baneful magic against you. I am one of those who believes that this sort of thing, well, there's an old saying, evil cannot enter unless it's invited, but that doesn't mean consciously. It means there has to be an opening, and most of our openings we're not aware of. This is why psychic hygiene is so important. This is why all that shielding is important. This is why cutting all of these cords is important. Yes, you can focus only on that particular negative cord that you might be aware of, but what are you not aware of? And what cords that you might not realize are negative are giving you a negative effect? So that's why I recommend this. But I also completely agree with Monica. Yes, work with your spirit guides or however you describe them. And they will do most of the work for you. That's part of why they're there. Do all of the shielding, make golems for protection. There are lots of things you can do. But remember that you also have to make sure that you're not missing scales. Of all the things I'm going to say to you during the Defense Against the Dark Arts Week, that's the most important one. It doesn't matter that you have an impregnable wall if there's also a door in it. And in fact, there are several famous stories from history of great cities that fell because they counted on their powerful walls to defend them and forgot that there were a few minor openings that the enemy used. And Calvin says this is where you need to work on controlling your emotions. Yes, Calvin, absolutely, you are completely correct. Not being in control of your emotions opens a lot of those doors. Now, as I say, I do not approve of baneful magic. So I'm hesitant to say anything that could be used by those who might wish to use it. But I am going to take a moment to say that using someone's emotions is a heck of a way to get something to them that they would not otherwise allow. But I say that more for the purpose of defense, to look at your own emotions. What are you allowing to come to you? I was always, I think, very concerned with compassion and kindness and helping other people, particularly if they seem to be particularly in need of help. A lot of those connections that were draining my energy were based on those emotions. Nothing I considered negative, but I was losing a lot of personal energy through it. And in cutting those particular connections, I did not make it impossible for the positive connections to reassert themselves or for new connections to be made. But I'm a little more careful who can have my energy now. And you should be too. And I do want to say that in the end, everything involving psychism and magic is about energy. You can say it's about ingredients, you can say it's about actions, but in the end, at least from the view that I approach it, it's all about the energy. And there are many different ways to approach and deal with that. But it's the energetic connections that must be broken to disrupt the effect. Sometimes there are more specific ways that you want to do this. And Monica says, yes, I was losing energy through helping others too. I had to start cutting those cords daily. Absolutely. And I think I know exactly the situations Monica is referring to. And it's a perfect example. And a lot of spiritual people do this. They are very compassionate and they allow people to take a lot of their energy, not realizing the harm this might be doing to themselves. Now, coming back to actual baneful magic, if someone is trying to harm you magically, and they know you're like that, they know that you're a compassionate, loving person, they can use that to send something through to you that might not get to you any other way. Be aware of that. Now, that doesn't mean you should shut yourself down. It means you should be looking for those connections and stopping them before they happen if possible, and cutting them off if they have happened. And Calvin says, just remember that no one is allowed to project their negativity onto anyone. Be aware of this and let them know they are not allowed to do so. Yes. You're in charge of your own energy, and you need to program it to repel negativity. But again, remember, there may be holes in your defenses. So just because you have strong defenses, and just because you know what you're doing, doesn't mean that things cannot still reach you. And I would consider myself a pretty good example of that. In that magically, I'm not really anyone to fool with. But that doesn't mean there are no openings in my defenses. This last year showed that there were. And most of those had to do with my willingness to help others who perhaps were not trying to help me. So as you as a spiritual person go forward, and I don't like to hit the oogie boogie notes. I don't like to tell you to worry about things like baneful magic. I think for the most part you don't need to, but do be aware of negative connections and do go through and cut them. Now, how do you do this? Because we do want to take a moment and focus on the how-to. You want to go into meditation and feel your energy, as we've talked about before. And you want to look for where you feel cords or connections, however you happen to want to describe it. And chances are you'll feel a lot of them, especially if you've never done this before. And you want to cut those. And you can visualize that as an energetic knife, literally cutting them. And you want to cut them as close to the surface as possible. And as you do that, you want to, quote, cauterize that connection. You want to seal it so that they cannot return. And as you do each one, you want to take a moment to make that charge that it cannot reattach itself. And you want to see that cord wither and dissipate. And it can take some time to do this if you have a lot of connections, and it's worth taking several days to do it, to get rid of all of them. And will you necessarily know what's on the other side of that cord? You will not necessarily, but sometimes you will. And if you have a feeling on for what's on the other end of that cord, you should pay attention. But like everything else in psychism and magic, receiving what you feel is a passive activity. So if you perceive what's on the other edge of that cord, what comes to you passively you want to pay attention to, but be careful you're not projecting. But the most important thing is to seal them, to cut them, to seal them, to make sure they cannot return, to wither the cord itself, and then to strengthen your aura, to strengthen your boundaries, having cut out these things. And Calvin says it has taken me years to do so, especially with family. And that's how we got into this conversation. We were talking about some people's negative family members, their toxic family members over the Thanksgiving holiday. And how do you disrupt that energy? If you have someone who affects you negatively, there's a cord there. Otherwise, they would not be affecting you negatively. So you want to cut that cord. That doesn't mean you're going to like them afterwards, but it means they will not be affecting you in the same way. I have met people who are totally debilitated just by someone's existence. That person has some major cords they need to cut. Now, the other person did not necessarily connect that cord. You may have done it yourself. I can think of some people in the last year who had comic opera reactions in my direction that make no sense whatsoever, but spoke to their emotional state and their energetic connections, but nothing I had established. So I can cut their connection to me, but that doesn't mean that they're not still going to react to it on their own end, but they will get no energy from it. And Calvin says, forgive them, then let them go. Yes, that's part of what we're talking about. Forgiveness and releasing are basically the same thing, at least when we're talking metaphysically. Monica says also, it's helpful to get rid of anything physically this person has given you. A nice pyre is great to transmute that energy, to cut those cords and make way for new to come in. And yes, that can be very useful, particularly depending on the individual. Sometimes getting rid of those objects will be a great key to releasing that person. Not to mention, they may have their own connections. So, although I don't necessarily think it's always necessary, it certainly is often a good thing to do. Anything that's going to help you cut that connection. And you don't need to know, if it's baneful magic that we're talking about, what they did to break it. And we're going to talk about more ways to break things as we go through this week and how to defend against them. What you need to do is cut the connection. And if it's not baneful magic, if it's just an emotional connection, you don't really need to know exactly why it is the way it is. You just need to cut it. Too often, I think we worry too much about why and too little about how. So look for those toxic things and get rid of them. whether they're energetic connections or real world interactions, you don't need the toxicity. It's not going to help you. Um, and you don't owe them your energy. Now, that's not to say there aren't times that we need to deal with people um, who may be trying to us. But if we make that choice, we must be aware we've made it and not let them take our energy from us in the process. And Calvin says, excellent conversation today. Thank you. Thank you, Calvin. Um, Now, we also had a question earlier from Rajput, and I want to go back to that question. And as I recall, well, let me just scroll up in the chat room. Rajput said, or asked, is it only by reading books of spirit medium again and again that we have the possibility of being psychic? Absolutely not. Some people are born with strong psychic abilities that I believe come from previous lives. And they don't necessarily need to read or study anything to be able to use it. I do think that no matter how much natural ability you may have, you do need to study to see what you might not be pulling through. Um, but yeah, there are a lot of people who are just naturally psychic. And if they don't study, it can be a very mixed blessing. Um, And Monica says all real world connection also has energetic connection. Absolutely true. And this is why daily cutting of all cords is very helpful. I thank you, Monica. I totally agree with that. So with that, I see we're coming down to the end of our hour, or our half hour, I should say. I want to thank you for joining me. I have quite enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have as well. I love you all. I love talking to you. I hope you have a beautiful day. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do, and I will see you tomorrow. Oh, and tomorrow we're going to talk about the famous freezing spell. And what do you do if you think you're in a bottle in someone's freezer? Tomorrow we're going to talk about that and how to break that. And Monica says, when it comes naturally, you don't know or realize what it is. Exactly. And you don't necessarily remember the fine points of it. Like what we're talking about today. A person who is naturally psychic has all these same connections, but might not know to cut them. So let us close with our prayer, and I will see you tomorrow. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in your presence in our lives, and we ask you to help us to keep our boundaries strong and our energy our own. Help us to be secure within our aura. And if there are those who wish to harm us, help us not to allow it, and to remember that it is in our power to end it. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you, and may you be blessed now and always. And again, I'll see you tomorrow.